Have you ever noticed how everybody seems to have an opinion when you're driving? Slow down, speed up, take this way, park here. But really, at the end of the day, there's only one person that gets to make those decisions. Well, today we're going to talk about how it's the exact same thing for life. Hey there, fellow travelers, and welcome to Get In You Are Driving. My name is Maria. I'm your host, and this podcast is going to be all about how we are going to take the wheel in life's journey. I really want to share something with you that I think we forget a lot of time, which is you have more control than you think. When you think about it, life is a lot like driving to sudden breakdowns, unexpected detours, waiting in traffic, regular maintenance, and so much more. And in this podcast, we're going to uncover the many lessons that being on the road can teach us. Whether we remember it or not, we always get to choose our direction, our attitude, and our response. Sure, the road might get really rough and it may feel like we're in the passenger seat, but if there's one thing I want you to always remember, it's that you are the one driving. Today, I'm going to talk about a few lessons that being on the road has taught me and what ultimately led me to want to start this podcast. So, the first reason is I'm an extremely curious person. I'm very open minded, and I really like to talk to people that are alike to me and very different to me and just get like people's perspectives on life. If there's one thing I've learned, there's a balance because you don't always want to talk to people that just agree with you, but you don't always want to just take upon any belief that another person is telling you about. You really want to find what is true for you. I really do just enjoy talking to people. I like listening to dialogue. I like listening to podcasts. But at the end of the day, with whatever conversation I've had, whether it's someone that I shared a perspective on or I didn't share a perspective on, I always try my best to really seek the truth in that conversation. Two, I am a huge proponent on self awareness and personal development. To me, when you're self aware and you want to develop, it's like having an extremely clean windshield in your life. Think about it. How can you really drive properly in your life if you don't even and can't even like really see what you're doing and you don't know the why of it all? I think so many people go through life not really thinking about who they are, the patterns in their behaviors, why they're doing what they do, and it just kind of puts you in this autopilot mode. That's exactly why I wanted to call this podcast Get In You Are Driving, because I think a lot of times we don't really realize, but we allow life to take us where it has to go and we kind of put ourselves in the passenger seat, but we need to be the one taking control and realizing that no, I'm always driving my car. So once we clean that windshield, we're able to see things clearly. And to me, that's when you can truly take the wheel in your life. And number three, I really like seeking the bigger picture of life and wisdom. I think it's amazing that we live in a time where we can read a book, we can go on YouTube, we can listen to a podcast, and we can essentially soak up all the wisdom that so many people around are giving us. I mean, when you really think about that, that is incredible. And I also want to know the bigger picture. I don't want to just get in the car and aimlessly drive. I mean, think about it. Have you ever gotten in your car and just started driving and you don't know what you're doing? Maybe like once if you're like having a terrible day and you go on a drive like me, but 99% of the time you're like, oh, I'm going to the supermarket or I'm going to the hotel or I'm going to work. Like you always know where you're going, right? So, from my perception, you should do the same in your life. You should always know where you're going in life and where you're headed and why. There is one more reason that I started this podcast, and it is the most important reason, but I want to share a few things that ultimately led me to starting it. So I will get to that last reason right at the end. So, a little bit of a story time. When I was 17 years old, I had two very major things happen in my life, and I was not prepared for them. I think it just was the very first time life handed me a very, very difficult situation. And I just genuinely did not know how to get past all the grief and the pain that I really was experiencing. I remember thinking one time so clearly to myself, Maria, I don't think you've really suffered very much up until this point. Like, this feels like it's really suffering. But because I was in really bad shape, the question I really kept asking myself on repeat was, how do I cope? What the experience really did to me at that time in my life was it exposed to me that I was very mentally weak and that life was only going to get harder. And if I was already reacting this way towards the situation, that I surely wasn't going to be prepared for the things coming ahead. I was just doing really badly and I knew I had to change this and I knew that if I somehow did not become strong, that life was going to win and I was going to lose. First of all, it just really paralyzed me with so much fear about my future because I thought to myself, like, what else is going to happen? What am I going to do? And at that point, I was in high school and it's not like anybody was teaching you how to cope with life. When you're in high school, I mean, you're just learning about biology. So during that time in my life, I think I was grasping onto a very deep truth, but I really wasn't able to articulate what that truth was until much later in my life. But I think in that moment, what I was really grasping and like on the cusp of understanding is what many philosophers have probably thought about. And I think what most of us in life have thought about at some point and realized, which is that suffering isn't just an occasional visitor in our lives, but it's an integral part of the human experience. I'm sorry, I'm going to look down at my computer sometimes to look at my notes because a lot of what I want to say is dense and I want to make sure that I say it in a way that really makes sense to anybody. So, yeah, I just really came to this point in this reality of like, ooh, there's a lot of suffering ahead of me. I need to figure out what I'm going to do. So, while there was this one side of me that was so mentally weak, didn't know what to do, was struggling really hard, I also noticed during that time there was this side of me that was the exact opposite that was telling me, you can do this, you can get through this, you can face what has happened to you. That instead of allowing the experience to kind of make me bitter, I could allow it to make me better. And I could also allow it to teach me something. Somewhere in there, deep down, there was a Maria that wanted to choose to not allow this situation and experience to mold her and wanted to choose to be resilient. Thing is, at that time, my heart and mind were just so weak that choosing that part of me that wanted to fight felt so unattainable. I just wasn't that Maria. But deep down, I just knew that I wanted to become her. I remember around that time, a little bit later, maybe not the exact time, I was reading a book by Viktor Frankl called A Man's Search for Meaning. If you've never heard of it, it is about a Holocaust survivor. So there was a lot to that book, but I remember there was this one quote that really, really stood out to me, which was, everything can be taken from a man, but one thing, the last of human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances. I remember reading this, and this perspective truly blew me out of the water because I thought to myself, here is a man that experienced one of history's most terrible, unfathomable things. But somehow, after his experience, he came to the conclusion that you can still choose your attitude and how you react to a situation that life hands you. But what was so cool about it was reading that gave me so much hope. Like it was just this light of hope that I had for the first time in a really long time because I thought to myself, if this man who went through the Holocaust can come out with that perspective and be that mentally strong, I can do it too. Surely, 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 I can do it too. So it really gave me a very healthy challenge and it pushed me to have the courage to ask myself, like, all right, this is a tough situation, but I can do it. I can move forward. I can be strong. I can be resilient, even when things are really, really hard. There was another thing. This was now about 2 or 3 years later. Again, listening to a lot of dialogue, listening to a lot of conversation. And this is something that I got from the one and only Jordan Peterson. And it was also a very fresh and new perspective that I never heard of, but it really stuck out with me. So I'm going to be kind of like paraphrasing what it is because I kind of took his ideas and then put it into my own words. I feel like that helps me think a lot and understand it in my own way. But essentially, this is what it is. So I do want to read this off more because I feel like if I don't, I'm gonna like lose my train of thought. So Essentially, he said that someone who is pessimistic, negative, and nihilistic is actually making the easy choice in life. I remember hearing that and I was like, okay, where's he going with this? Like, I need to hear more. Like, why, right? And he says, because seeing the world through this lens aligns with the undeniable reality that life is full of suffering, challenges, and malevolence. So I think key word that really got me was undeniable reality, right? Like it does not take a rocket scientist to know that life is very difficult. So again, he says, paraphrasing in my words, we all know this. It's the default experience of being human. But when we focus solely on the darkness, this requires no real effort. It's just accepting what's most visible and overwhelming as the entirety of existence. But on the other hand, the person who acknowledges life's suffering and malevolence, yet still chooses to see the good, create meaning, and believe in something better despite it all, that person is making the harder, braver choice because it takes courage, resilience, responsibility, and most of all, faith to to confront life's darkness and decide to make things better. To choose this path is to accept that life will be difficult and full of struggles and setbacks, yet to push forward anyways. It's to live knowing that meaning isn't handed to us. It's something we must create, even in the face of pain and adversity. So, overall, Peterson's reasoning is that while life is inherently full of suffering, the easiest thing we can do is surrender to it, whereas the harder but more rewarding path is to rise above it and to allow that suffering to sorry, the harder, more rewarding path is to rise above it and to transform that suffering that we've experienced into something worthwhile. This, he says, is the essence of real responsibility and meaning. Meaning isn't found, it is created. Now, again, I'm paraphrasing all of this, but this was essentially the core message. Um, this was something I had never heard before because honestly, when you talk to most people do tend to be more on like the pessimistic side. They tell you, well, I'm a realist, da 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 da. And then if you do tend to be more positive, positive, you kind of get that look of like, oh, well, you're so innocent, you're so naive. So this was just such a new perspective for me and honestly, it was extremely encouraging to hear because it wasn't sunshine and rainbows either. Like he also was saying like you're going to suffer. Like it's going to be really hard. But there was also this promise attached to it that but if you choose this, you're going to become stronger. You're going to become resilient and life is going to feel worthwhile. And honestly, at the end of the day, why it truly resonated with me, because again, this was a few years later after 17 when my world just, um, I feel like this was the answer of the question that I kept asking myself when I was 17 of how do I cope? This was my answer. This was how I coped. Because to me, in this message, he spoke to the side of me that was very deeply in pain, and he acknowledged that and how difficult that would feel and would be. But he also acknowledged the part of me that wanted to fight through it, that wanted to have resilience, and that wanted to move forward and just knew that I couldn't forever allow it to sink me. So, like, again, after those experiences at 17 and then just kind of moving forward from that, I really was slowly realizing that life's most persistent question is not, what are you doing? It's, who are you? Who are you? And I just remember having such a clear shift of that in my life. Because I really didn't like school at that point. Like, I feel like I blew into that. I really disliked school. And I feel like school was all about what do you do? And I wasn't particularly the best at school. And I just started thinking about like, well, who am I? And like, what does that mean in life? So I really kept asking myself this question, who am I? And because of that, it really challenged me to grow. It challenged me to listen to people. It challenged me to read because I wanted to get better and I wanted to get stronger. I just knew I needed to become more resilient because if not, life would win and I would lose. And I was already kind of experiencing that. And I didn't want to go down in the trenches more. So I think at that point in my life, without fully like consciously knowing what was happening, I was embarking on a journey that would be a lifelong journey of self improvement and resilience, and ultimately becoming the person that I wanted to be. I really realized that to do that, I needed to get out of my own way. And since then and now, I work really hard on that every single day. In fact, I probably always will be because that's the reality. We don't just improve and get there. Life isn't about the destination, it's about the journey. I want to get into one more thing that was holding me back and keeping me very fearful of life, and that was the opinions and experiences of other people. So now that I was out of my own way, I needed to get people out of my way. Really, it was me allowing them to mess me up, but I didn't realize that until much later. So I remember specifically when I went off to college and started to seriously think about my future, who I wanted to be, the type of person that I wanted to become. I noticed this pattern in pretty much every conversation, or at least most conversations and most interactions with people. The pattern was everyone was so negative. Everyone. Worst of all, or at least how I felt like they were projecting all their negative experiences onto me. And let's just be real, this was the case for me. I can't speak for everybody. 90% of it was unsolicited advice. It was what they were telling me. I did not ask them anything. For some reason, they just still felt like they needed to share it with me. And I just remember, like, after encounters with people, I would feel so defeated and so discouraged. And it could be about anything. It could be about a romantic relationship. It could be about a job. It could be about my future. It could be about wanting to buy a peach. I don't know. But it just felt like it was about everything. And I just really like noticed myself being just extremely discouraged about life and the future ahead of me. And sometimes I noticed that it was almost like people couldn't help themselves. They just had to like get their 2 cents in. They just had to like make me aware of this reality so that I wouldn't make the mistake. And that was just something that I didn't fully like understand why, but they did it. So it brought me to this point, and this might sound odd, but I wanted to understand, why are people always or almost always projecting the negative? I needed to know, and I was kind of like doing this experiment of like, is life as terrible as everybody made it out to be, or were they just projecting what they wanted onto me? So I started to watch people like a hawk. Now, if it was somebody that I only would have an interaction with once, right? Like at the grocery store or something, I wouldn't like think too much of it. But if it was somebody that was like an acquaintance, I shared a class with, I worked with, I was watching them. Because ultimately, again, it was like, is this how life is? Or are these people not getting out of their own way? And that's why they're having all these extremely negative experiences. So, after a lot of observing, and I've always kind of been observant, like even as a little girl, I realized that, okay, it seems very typical that people tend to project their life experiences onto you, and they kind of make you feel that their outcome will be your outcome. And then I also noticed that people think that they're doing you a favor and preparing you by like sharing these things with you. But like in reality, they're leaving out so many crucial details. And ultimately, those details are the choices they made that led them to the outcomes they didn't want. I'm going to repeat that. The details they were leaving out were the choices they made that led them to the outcomes they didn't want. And I wish sooner that somebody would have told me, take what people say with a grain of salt, because it would have saved me from just accepting a lot of fear. So yeah, I should have realized, like, take things with a grain of salt. But then after a while, I really realized, and I say this in a very respectful manner, but if you do not want to switch lives with the person that's giving you advice about XYZ, don't listen to them. Don't take what they have to say to face value. If you would not want to trade lives with them, don't listen to them. It's just not worth it. It's not worth it. Now, I'm not saying that you're not ever going to suffer and like whatnot. And yeah, like you're going to struggle. But again, the biggest thing I realized is that when I was listening to these people telling me these things, there wasn't really anybody that wanted to take responsibility and accountability for those decisions that they were making in their life. And, I started realizing that it slowly all ties back to what Jordan Peterson said about it's really easy to complain because the world is full of suffering. It's full of malevolence. Like, that's obvious. But it's really hard to be positive, to choose to have faith, to be optimistic, and to keep pushing forward because, yeah, I mean, when all you hear is negativity, that almost just feels like a naive thought that, a 5-year-old told you to do. So after all this time, something that I noticed was, especially in the beginning, that all those discouraging voices just genuinely were echoing in my mind. And I really can't even begin to describe with words like how deeply it affected me, how it made me feel that people only had like negative things to share with me. And I just really didn't know like who on earth to turn to. And I just really started wondering like, is life just simply a bunch of negative experience, piled up? Voices really were just echoing. So when I first was thinking about starting this podcast, I really wasn't sure what on earth like I would have to say, what on earth that entails. But I was listening to a podcast and I remember one of the guys said this and it really stuck with me. And he said, why should we hear your voice? And I loved that question because there was so much truth to it. Like, after all, who am I? I'm just a girl living my life, not doing anything special. And, because I felt like there were so many discouraging voices around me, I was like, I don't want to just be another discouraging voice. Like, I don't want to not help uplift people. So I was really thinking to myself, what on earth could I say that would actually and genuinely add value to someone's life? But more importantly, the question was, could I be a voice of encouragement for people? And I really pondered on that for a while. I thought so much about how I really needed encouraging voices in my life and how I was really seeking them out, especially when I was 17 and my life just took that super drastic turn. I've also always been someone who thinks really deeply about life, how to live it, how to find meaning in it. Um, and I do think that meaning isn't something we find. I think it's something we create. So, based off of this whole thing and this idea of meaning is something that we create and not something that we find, I've realized over the years that I feel very like attentive to that. And I think that just comes very naturally to me in the way that I just see how life flows in general. And I think that it's just like this insight that I have and I have always categorized not categorized people. People I really think have like gifts to do certain things in life. Like, for example, some people are just amazing at numbers. Couldn't be me. Some people are amazing at reading people. Some people are amazing at math. Like, whatever it may be, we can usually recognize when someone has an ability to do something very well. And something that I've just realized in myself is that it just really does come naturally to me to like reflect on life and just really think about it and like all the things that really encompass it. Because of this, I just feel that I've learned so much in my life. And because of this, I just feel this deep responsibility to share that with other people because I know the things that I have thought about and really implemented in my life have genuinely transformed my life. I observe people all the time and I see a lot of people in pain, a lot of people that don't know how to cope with what's happening to them. And at the end of the day, we all need a voice of encouragement. We all do. The other day, somebody made a really wonderful analogy about when a toddler tries to walk and when they fall. We don't say, like, oh my gosh, you fell. Like, stay down. Like, how terrible. All we do is we look at that toddler and we're like, come on, you can do it. You can get up, try again. And we're just like that toddler. All of us, even as grown adults, we all need a voice of encouragement to tell us, hey, get back up. You can do it. So, after reflecting on that question of why do we need to hear your voice, I really started to wonder what if I could truly be a voice of encouragement for others? And what if I could genuinely share the perspectives and the insights and the mindsets that have really transformed my life with other people? What if I could bring value? Like I said before, there's just so many voices of discouragement around us, whether people intentionally mean to be discouraging or not. I don't want to judge people's intent, but that is mostly what you hear. You hear discouraging voices, you hear the negative news, and it's just extremely paralyzing. And I don't want to be somebody that contributes to that in any way, shape, or form. I think rarely do we meet the person that encourages us, but still tells us, hey, this is reality as well. So you need to figure things out. And again, we just don't hear a lot of voices that are uplifting. To the final and most important reason as to why I started this podcast is because if you allow me to be a voice of encouragement for you, that is what I would like to do, because I know that when I started this journey of self improvement and figuring out that life was really difficult, I didn't know who to turn to. I didn't know what voice to listen to. And I needed a voice to really tell me it would work out. And the reality is, we all do. We always need a voice of encouragement. I want to be the voice that says, hey, this is going to be really hard, but you can do it. You can get up. You have the courage. But I also want to counterbalance that with truth and reality about what could happen. And I don't just want to perfectly sugarcoat it as well. I really think there's a middle ground between toxic positivity and defeating pessimism. And I would put myself smack dab in the middle of those two things. Life is hard. Yes. There will be suffering. Absolutely. In fact, that is a promise. And like I said, when I was facing those first real hardships in my life at 17, I learned that really quick. And I'm sure you have too. But I also learned something else that really changed everything for me. And that's back to what Viktor Frankl said, which is that we always have a choice to how we are going to react to the challenges that life throws our way. We can always choose our attitude, as he said, because that is something that can never, ever be taken away from us. So that's really what I want this podcast to be about. I want it to be about the beautiful, but also the brutal. And I just really, I want to say it again. I want it to be a reminder. You get to choose your direction. You get to choose your attitude. You get to choose your result. The road really is rough, but I promise you are the one driving all the time. And I really do fundamentally believe that when you make goals in your life and take certain actions and make certain decisions, that you can absolutely get to where you want to go. I truly, truly believe that. So, yeah, I'm really here to continue having real conversations with you all about the journey that we're on that is called life. To talk about how we can acknowledge life's hardships, but we can also choose to move forward with intention and with purpose. And to just share practical wisdom about how to stay in the driver's seat when life gets very scary. Because at the end of the day, you're always the one driving. It just takes the courage to get in the driver's seat day after day. If you have listened to the whole thing, thank you so much for being here. Sorry if it's a bit sporadic. It wasn't as easy as I thought to sit down and film all my very dense thoughts, but I wanted to be very careful with what I said. But yeah, really thanks for being here until the end. I did have to look down at my computer a bit, but I took a lot of notes and I just wanted to make sure that it could be worthwhile for you guys. Overall, I really hope this can be the beginning of something super encouraging, super exciting. And I hope that what I continue to say in this podcast will be able to help you make changes in your life, but to ultimately remember that no matter if it's my voice you're listening to or somebody else's, at the end of the day, it's not other people that will change your life. It is you that will change your life. So I will catch you in next week's episode. And thank you so much for being here. And thank you so much for listening. Have a great rest of your day.